Hello, everyone. I'm Arsam, and this is the sixth episode of the Futurpreneur podcast. And today we have a very, very special guest, Dr. Farid Holakouee. Dr. Farid Holakouee is a clinical psychologist with a private practice in Los Angeles, California, and he earned his bachelor's degree in psychology from UCLA, and he then went on to obtain a master's degree and PhD in clinical psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology. Dr. Farid Holakouee also hosts a radio show and podcast on Radio Hamra called In Session. So thank you so much for being on my podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Arsam. It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Yes, likewise. It's really, really an honor to have you on my podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. The honor is all mine.
Okay, so let's begin. Let's begin with the questions, shall we?
Sure.
So please tell us what got you interested in psychology in the first place? Why did you want to become a psychologist?
Originally, since I was a child, I wanted to be a medical doctor. I think as an Iranian, it's almost like default that you want to become a medical doctor, either from the pressure from everyone around you, or you just know it's a good thing to do. But I genuinely remember being interested in helping others, even though I know that sounds cliche, but doing things that helps other people. And so I was pre-med for my first year or so in college. But once I took a psychology class, I remember it really, really resonated with me and connected with me in a way that I was like, okay, no, I think this is what I was meant to do. So it really was that first class I took that had a big influence. My father also is a therapist and does things in the field of psychology, so I know that played a part as well. But I think when I took that psychology class and I realized I wanted to help people and thought, okay, medicine was the path for me, I realized that actually this might even be more aligned with who I am. I'm a sensitive person, care about people's feelings and understanding what they're going through. So even more, it seemed like it was what I would be, not I want to say meant to do, but really aligned with who I was and what I wanted to do. So I was pretty young then. So I was kind of lucky that I knew at that age. And since then, I kept going into it. And I really enjoy all aspects of psychology, social psychology, and developmental psychology. And I myself went into clinical psychology because I wanted to be a therapist.
Yeah, that's good. So it was like a calling for you, kind of.
In a way,
become a
yeah.
psychologist.
I would say, it's one of those cliche things. I was kind of lucky in that way. I think for a lot of people, what I've noticed though, just personally and then also professionally as a therapist, we sometimes have this idea that your calling or your passion is going to like just show up out of nowhere, or you should know it from a certain age. But oftentimes what you see is people find their calling or find their passion by trying different things. And this is why I think it's important for children to get exposed to many different types of activities and interests and subjects to see what resonates with them, because you never really know. And sometimes they go down one path and in that path, they find actually something else. And so it's just allowing them to explore and find it, because often people don't just wake up one day and know exactly what they want to do. They'll find that path and that passion.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that great answer. So one question I think is that a lot of people my age would also like relate to it, and everyone has a problem in their age and like being a teenager. What was your biggest problem as a teenager? What problem did you have to overcome?
Sure. There's few. Yeah, I think it's a great question because we sometimes forget, and I still have a lot of room to grow and professionally, personally, but I feel like I'm in a better place now. And we look at, I remember being, when you're younger and you look up at adults, you think like it was just easy for them, or they were always doing it the right way, and it made sense, or they didn't get it wrong. But that definitely wasn't the case. I had my challenges. In my family, there was some challenges, like, every family has some issues. So there were some things there. My parents getting divorced when I was a teenager, that was had a big impact on me. And then in my education, I even had some obstacles that I kind of created myself too. I think I was unsure about myself as a student and certain things. So when I first started college, I won't get into all the details because it's a long story, but I got myself in a place where I didn't know if I was going to be able to continue. I didn't know if I had it in me, so I had that self-doubt was creeping in. And so I really got to a tough point before I started at UCLA. So here in the United States, you can start at a community college and transfer to university, and that's something I did. But during that period in community college, I really was struggling with staying on top of things and handling everything. And it's interesting now, being a psychologist, I can look back and realize a lot of it was things I was dealing with emotionally. And so when I work with families and they tell me a child is not doing well in school, of course, the grade matters, the schooling matters, all that stuff. But I usually think, well, what's going on emotionally or psychologically for them if they're getting an F? I usually tell parents, an F, either if you're totally in the wrong class, like, let's say you don't even speak the language, yeah, you're going to get an F. But usually an F is more of an emotional grade than an academic grade. Like something's going on for that person. So when I look back, I realized I was really slipping and doubting that I could even finish college at some point, which, is kind of crazy to me now because I went on to get my PhD. But just for anyone out there, if you're struggling or if you're at a point where you think I can't do it or it's not for me, just know that almost everyone who made it in whatever field, even sports, academics, they doubted themselves at some point, and it doesn't mean the self-doubt went away. So don't believe that voice that tells you maybe you can't do it or you're not good enough or it shouldn't be this difficult. Almost everything worth doing is very difficult. And so I hope if you're having a rough patch or a rough time, just know that that doesn't mean it's the final chapter of your story. It's just one of the chapters that you'll then overcome and keep going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the next question, it's about anxiety. Like my generation, especially, like self-esteem issues and anxiety is kind of like a trend at this point. Like it's all over social media. Like kids my age make jokes about anxiety and self-esteem issues. Like it's such a normal thing at this point. Like it's like a surprise if someone doesn't have it, like social anxiety and self-esteem issues. So what do you think are some reasons? Like what are the causes of these kind of issues and how can you fix them?
Yeah, that's a great question because, of course, it's not like social anxiety is new or it didn't exist before, but I think we are seeing increases and it's important to look at what could be going on that contributes to that. So on one hand, these memes or posts that people put about mental health issues are good because before everyone felt like they had to hide it and be ashamed of it and, suffer in the dark. And I think it's good that we are putting it out there more and, making it something we can talk about and even joke about in some ways. Some of that is good. But I also think it's reflecting that these issues are rising. And it's kind of funny because we're talking about posting them online. And I think one of the contributing factors is social media, the internet, the ways we communicate in a few different ways. One is just the fact that everything can be done like online or through texting and these kinds of ways has made it so people are much more comfortable with those kinds of communication and less comfortable with in-person types of communication, So, I mean, there's even so many memes about not even just in person, but phone calls, like no one calls anyone anymore. And if someone calls you, you're almost like annoyed because I think it makes people more anxious or they might say it's because like they want to do whatever they're doing. And sometimes it's that, but I think people get more anxious about phone calls than they used to because we just don't do it as much. And even the pandemic contributed to this in a way too, because everyone was stuck. A lot of things happened, obviously, but one of the effects was everyone was indoors more, separated, socially isolated, not in contact with each other. And we got more comfortable with that. And even a lot of people had this experience as they were getting more social in person that it was like, I forgot how to do this. It felt uncomfortable or we didn't know how to handle it or manage, the timing of things. So I think on a larger scale, we're seeing that with the younger generation, that a lot of their social life is being experienced in these ways that are not in person. And they're getting so much more comfortable with those ways of communicating that they're not as comfortable in person. And I think that's not good. It's good to have both, but we want to encourage those things, because the more you don't do something, the less you can do it, or it feels like you can do it. So I think that's important that we encourage that. And then also social media itself contributes to some of these social anxieties, because it's creating these unrealistic comparisons for people, where they are just seeing, people who are the best and the brightest and everything, and curated, and posts and filters and Photoshop and all sorts of things. And it's just creating these ways of comparing ourselves, where it's making people use that self-esteem like they're not enough, because they're saying, oh, look at this person, look at that person, how they're living their life. And it's making people, because of that, become obsessed with getting likes and followers and those things, and comparing in that way, which it's like this new drug of the digital age, or these likes and follows. Like, it makes people feel good for a moment. I've even worked with people where they say, sometimes I'm feeling down and I post a picture online that I know might get some attention, just to get some responses, some feedback. And it really is like a drug. It's going to make you feel good for a moment, but then it's going to go away, because it's not the meaningful things of life that really will make you happier or fulfilled long term. Or with relationships, you see people put like relationship goals, and it's just like a picture, like a 5-second video, and it looks cute, or it's something like people think is nice. But really, a genuine relationship that's healthy, you can't measure that or show that in a picture, or show that in some 10-second video of two people together. You don't really know what it's like for those people. So unfortunately, it's making us much more focused on people's opinions of us, their judgments of us, rather than our own experience. And so the internet can't make something out of nothing. We already do have this focus on, what do people think of me? How do they judge me? And that's part of being human, part of being social, but it's just amplifying that, where we become way more focused on those things, rather than focusing on ourselves. So you see people just looking for ways to get attention online, rather than, how do I make myself and my life better in a genuine way?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, definitely social media has contributed a lot to these kinds of problems. And now, just like people, think about their value, it's like it's related to how much likes they get, or how much followers they have. And everyone just creates like a fake persona on their social media, and their real life is nothing like that. The way they act, the way they look, it's nothing like that on the way that they show it on social media. Yeah, so I totally agree with that, definitely being like contributor to these kinds of issues.
Mhm.
Um, and something else that also is kind of related to this is that, again, a lot of people really care about what others think about them, and how like they judge them, how they see them. And again, this again is mostly specifically towards my generations, not just my generation, but it definitely has increased. So why do you think that is? Why do you think people care so much about other people's opinions on them?
Yeah, and it goes back to what I was just saying, where it's like it's not like it's makes something out of thin air. Even every age, people care what people think about them. It's the matter of degree. And related to that, I also want to make it clear, for me, when we look at any of these complex things like social media, the internet, phones, it's very easy for people to say phones are bad or social media is bad. And we try to make it very black and white, where I always think, if we really want to look at anything, we have to have a nuanced and more balanced perspective. So is social media bad? No, we can't just say it's just bad. There's lots of ways that it's very good. People get, they learn things, they educate, they connect. People who maybe had some issue that they thought only they had, they connect with other people who have that same issue, and now they don't feel as alone. And so there's lots of ways that it could be very good too. So it's about looking at it in a more balanced way. But then on the negative side, yes, it does make us hyper focused on what others think of us in this way that's unrealistic, because our brain is made in a way of like, okay, there's like 100 people in our our small group, or 150 people, and we might care about what they think. And now it's just like billions of people who we don't even know, unnamed, unknown, around the world, can affect like how we feel and think about ourselves, or we're worried about what they think about us. So I think it's unfortunately amplifying this aspect of our human nature, that we do care about what people think, but in ways that it's like, way out of sync with what our brains really can understand. So it's like 1 million people like me or something. What does that even really mean? It's hard for us to comprehend that. And now we're living our life for these people, or affecting our life, let's say, if it's not totally living it, for what other people are going to think about us. And so I think it's important to, so again, not to be black and white. So it's not like no social media ever. You can do that. But I think it's very important to be aware of, how much you're on social media. It's a hard thing, but people, I've been there where I was like, I'm older, so it's probably supposed to be TikTok, but I could be on Instagram Reels for like an hour and not even realize I'm just like going through it. And I'm like, what was I doing? Like, I don't even know what happened. I kind of got sucked into this time vortex. So I really think it's important limiting how much, being aware of what are you posting and why. I always ask people, like, what's your intention? Like, why do you think you're posting this right now? Is it like, oh, I just want to share things with people I know, or I think this is an important issue? How much is it like, I want attention, I want people to think I'm good or think I'm something? And I think that's the big problem, is that, again, we all have this of like, we want to look a certain way. Like, a persona is not a new thing just to social media, but it makes it so much more amplified that you can be so hyper focused on, what do people think of me? I'm a good person, so let me post this thing where I'm like talking about this, like, social justice issue, which I think is good. People talk about those things, but you can see sometimes it's more about, I want to look good rather than I'm trying to promote good. And that's a distinction. So I think, unfortunately, it could take you that way. If you go deep into it, if you spend 12 hours on social media, it's going to take you to some bad places mentally, where you're going to be hyper focused on other people, their opinion of you, and you start to lose touch with yourself. And this is, I know this is getting to be a very long answer, but to me, another aspect of phones, social media, is that we use them very often. Like I was saying, even when if I'm on for an hour and I don't realize it, probably I'm trying to distract myself from something, whether it's something I need to do, or some even feeling within myself, like maybe I don't want to just, sometimes people don't want to have nothing going on, because then they have to feel like, is there a sadness there, an anxiety or something? And so they try to just distract themselves. So I think one of the things that happens is, through social media, texting and the phones, we connect to others a bit more, but for a lot of people, at the expense of disconnecting from themselves. So they're not as connected to themselves. What am I feeling? What am I going through? What do I need? And I think that's a big problem. And we have to make sure we keep that in balance, where we're staying in touch with ourselves.
Yeah. And like, again, before social media, before the internet, people already cared a lot about how people thought about them, like just in families. I haven't seen this much in Western culture, but I think I've definitely seen a lot of just Asian families. They care a lot about how other people think about them, how they perceive them. And now with social media, it has just doubled, and everyone just cares about how other people see them. So how do you think we can stop caring so much about how other people judge us?
Yeah, I mean, what you brought up is a very important point, where it's, all of these things also don't happen in a vacuum. There's cultural factors, and then, societal factors in global sense, but then individually, then families. Like, there's so many different layers and interwoven pieces to these puzzles. And, Middle Eastern cultures, some Eastern cultures, we sometimes talk about like collectivistic versus individualistic cultures. And so we are even more focused on, how do you look? How does it look to others? Bringing shame to your family. Whereas in like Western cultures, it's much more about the individual. Who are you and what do you do? And it's all about what you want, rather than what other people want, or even your family or other people. So I think in Eastern cultures and, Middle Eastern cultures, that I was born in the United States, but my family is Iranian. So, I mean, you see that, where it's like even more hyper focused on what others think. And yeah, with social media, that gets amplified again. So I think it's recognizing it does matter what, we also can't say it doesn't matter at all what people think, but it depends on the who. That's the problem with, I've experienced this too, where you can just, if you look at comments and things, and like, you don't even know who these people are, but it can like ruin your day. Someone could just write some
Yeah.
really mean thing, and they often do. I don't know if you had any of that yourself, but people just write something, and who knows what it was like. And this is why it's so important. We don't take things personally, but we tend to, maybe they're like they just want to say something that's bringing up something in them, but they say something really horrible, and it could mess up your day, when it has probably nothing you should learn from that. Sometimes it's good to learn from feedback from other people, but internet comments and these things is not the place to learn about yourself or, learn about what you're doing. So it makes it really hard not to get caught up in that if you pay attention to it. And so I think it's important noticing what you pay attention to and how much, and whose voices am I listening to? Yes, you should think for yourself, but your loved ones, friends and family that really know you, they can give you valuable feedback and understanding yourself better. Even that's why therapy can be so good, is because someone outside can see us much better than we can see ourselves, because we have so many blind spots to seeing ourselves. But if you then turn to social media and hear just random comments or random things from other people, good or bad, so that's another problem. So I people think, well, it makes me feel so good. But as I was mentioning before, it could kind of be like a drug, and it can be very empty. So, and they maybe don't even know you. So they say, oh, that was amazing, or you're so great, but they don't really know you to even assess you good or bad. So I think it's important to keep people around you that you trust and you value, and to listen to their opinions, at least as taking it in as information. But more and more, obviously, you want to rely on yourself to understand yourself, rather than allowing, just unknown people around the world to tell you you're this or you're that.
Yeah, that's a great answer to that question. So again, the topic of Generation Z. It's that Generation Z, I think, is very different. It's kind of like unique from the other generations. So definitely, we're a lot different in a lot of different ways. And especially with like children's and their parents, millennials and the older generations, how do you think like we can understand each other, be able to connect better and be able to communicate better with the
Sure.
older generations?
Yeah, and to be honest, sometimes I'm sure I've seen them before. Sometimes I don't know the cutoffs of these different, like Gen Z, Gen Y, millennials. So I mean, are you Gen Z, or are you what would you be a part of?
Yeah, I'm Gen Z.
Gen Z. Okay. Now, one of the
Yeah.
things I think you kind of meant, I think you said it today. I heard some of your podcasts too, so maybe but maybe it was in the podcast, but nonetheless, it is interesting that there are some people like yourself who never lived in a world before the internet and certain things, right? So you were born into that, whereas someone like
Yeah.
me, there was no internet, and then it came on and very slow at the beginning. It was a whole very different thing than what it is now. You can't even compare it, and so it's always good because it gives me some perspective of like, okay, these things, I don't just take them as it always was this way, which is always the case. That's why we try to understand history. We want to value the voices of elderly people at times, because there is a wisdom of seeing how things have changed that is very important, that until you experience it, you don't know. And so I think that is tough, because parents and their kids, always there's going to be it's a generation gap just by definition, that it's a parent and their child. So that creates some issues. Then there's like often cultural, issues that come up, especially for me, like a child of immigrants. So there's things like that. And then this is a kind of like a technological gap as well, of like how you approach the world, even how well you understand it. You see there's kind of these like cliche things, like the kid teaches the parents how to fix their phone or the TV or the computer, because they were just kind of born into that world, and to them it's much more natural and they have more knowledge of it. So
Yeah.
I think it's important that parents and kids have to always recognize that there's a different perspective. It doesn't mean one of them is totally right and the other one is wrong. And probably you can learn from one another. Maybe the kids won't learn too much about how to use computers, but they probably can understand some perspective of what they think the world is. It doesn't have to be how it always was or how it should be. And that gives them some perspective. But there's always going to be conflict there, because you're just having different perspective on the same thing because of your different experiences. And so usually what I encourage is, you're probably not going to agree on everything, but to try to have understanding, and that's different. So I can understand, even if I don't agree with it, okay, but I get it from your perspective, even if I still don't agree with it. And almost every family I work with that has teenagers, one of the issues that comes up is they're on their phone too much, or video games, or certain things. It's like almost every single family, especially on the phones too much, is probably the most common one, because not everyone plays video games, but pretty much everyone has a phone. So, these things are always going to be coming up of why they're on their phones so much and things. And it doesn't mean they're all wrong. It is part of this world where people are on their phones more and they connect that way. But if you're on your phone 14 hours a day or something, it's not healthy. So the parent isn't totally wrong to be like, okay, maybe it should be less. It's not black or white, but it could be less. So there's always going to, any time period you look at, you'll see these like, oh, parents are saying, look at these kids, they're getting into bad things. They shouldn't do, it's just, it's always that trend is there. I think technology has changed so much recently that it's creating some new challenges, or it's like accelerated. But some of those themes have always been there. Parents thinking, oh, these kids, like they don't understand and they're doing bad things. And the kids think, oh, these parents don't get it. Like they don't know what the world is like now. And actually, parents at times have to be aware of letting their child understand this new world, because we want the kids to understand computers better than us, because that's the world and it's better for them to know it rather than to stay in this old mentality. Or let's say Iranians, they move to the US, it's understandable they want their kids to be like them and to stay connected in that way. So when they see them culturally going away from them, it can be very difficult, and that leads to a lot of conflict. But we have to also recognize for that child in this, let's say now American culture they're in, or country and culture, it's important for them to adapt to that. So if we try to hold them back to our old ways, or our own ways, it might not be to their benefit. Let's just say a simple one is like language. It's like, no, don't learn English because you have to talk with us. Let's say an extreme example. That child needs to function in an American school and American life, that we need them to know English. So you often see this with parents. It's this feeling of like, I'm losing my kid and they're going down this path and they're going away from me. But part of parenting is allowing our children to go away from us if they have to, towards what's better for them. But this also brings up, this collectivist, all these other issues. So again, we see how interwoven all of these issues can be.
Yeah, like something that I've experienced myself is that I don't live in America, nor was I born in America, but I think kind of my mindset and kind of my humor is pretty Americanized. So sometimes when I watch like American movies, or like when I watch stand-up comedies, I start laughing, but then my parents just sit there like so confused.
Yeah.
And then when they watch Persian movies, or like when they watch Persian comedies and stuff, I don't get a thing. Like our humor is so different, but my mom still like really wants me to stay connected with that Persian culture. So I definitely relate with that a lot. And I think it's important to stay connected with your heritage, but it's also okay to like adapt some new stuff from other cultures as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, so it's another one of those, it's not black or white. And we get going back to
Mhm.
understanding, it seems like you kind of get it. Your mom wants for you to be close, for even to enjoy something together, right? So she wants to watch it and
Yeah.
you laugh together, rather than she laughs and you're like, what's going on? Or you watch your thing and you're laughing, she doesn't know what's going on. So there is something we can understand about that. We want to share things together. But yeah, it's important that they also give you the space to find your path, and even staying connected to our heritage. Of course, the parents can like give us that and share that. But if you force it, it usually backfires anyway. So if you say you have to like
Yeah.
this, or you have to do this. And what we see often is children of immigrants, or children in general, they kind of go through this process where when they're very young, because they're so connected to their parents, they're immersed in that culture, their home culture, let's say. But then when they get into teenagers, they're finding their own identity. They tend to go towards, like, let's say, the American culture if they're living here. And then they often come back. I even felt that myself, that when I was like a teenager, I was like, oh, like I didn't like the Iranian stuff, and like I wanted to be more American, and like thought that stuff was like annoying. But then I got older, I came back to it more, and really see the beauty in so many Iranian things, from culture, language, So it's like, but if you try to interfere, sometimes the person says like, forget it, I never want to be close to that again, because it's like they have this like negative, it feels like it's not their choice to go towards it. So I think it's very important for parents to show them, be open to sharing with them, but allowing their child to go through their path, because they usually do come back to it more. But if you pressure them, they sometimes don't come back.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. They should like teach you stuff about their culture, their ways, and like encourage you to be interested in it and learn yourself. But then forcing them to do it, just yeah, like you said, it backfires, and it kind of makes them annoyed and feel controlled. And like that's something like my generation does not like at all. We don't like being controlled. We like to be in control. And like I'm not personally like that too much. I'll admit that I'm somewhat like this, is that we kind of think that we already are big and we know so many things. So we want to make our own choices and decisions. And then parents are saying, no, that's wrong. So definitely that just makes it worse. But then again, it's really good to know stuff about your own culture and keep in touch.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, look, you're like, look, no one likes to be told what to do or think, but yeah, teenagers, it's a time of really exploring and things. And so even they need some of that rebellious, like think for themselves and challenge things. And so parents have to allow for that. But yeah, you're right. It's a tough thing for a lot of parents to be okay with. And you also said something I think was very wise in that is like, whatever age we are, we tend to think we figured it all out, And I remember
Yeah.
when I was a teenager, I was like, oh yeah, what else am I going to learn about life? I kind of think I get it. And then every age you look back, you're like, oh wow, like I've learned so much. And actually we would hope that's the case that, even yourself right now, I think you're 14. I would hope when you look back in this, when you're 13,
Yes.
it's not that you're great at 13, but you've probably grown a lot. And if you didn't, that would be bad that if in this one year you didn't like learn and grow. And so we hopefully are constantly evolving and should recognize that as much as I think things make sense, there's a lot I don't know and I don't even realize I don't know. So it creates a bit of a humility that none of us knows it all or has the whole thing. So we listen a little bit more to each other. But sometimes with parents and, as often is the case, it becomes so combative. It's about like proving who's right and wrong rather than trying to understand each other and learn from each other.
Exactly. Um, so let's get on with the next question.
Okay.
So this is again about children a lot and also kind of involves, I guess, parents and families as well. And is that why do you think children and young people lie and hide so many stuff? Like everyone lies, but why do you think people start at such a young age sometimes?
That's true. I was just reading a book, and the part I was reading last night talked a bit about lying and humans things. But um, if we generally look at why do we lie, there's kind of a few types of reasons. One is to get something we want that maybe we won't get if we're honest, like so cheating or stealing type of ways. Um, Often though with parents and kids, we know that it's because they're either afraid or it's not easy to tell them the truth. So that's a pretty big one we see. And so it's not to ever justify lying. But if you see someone close to you, especially as a parent, if you see your child lying to you, I think a good question to ask yourself is how easy do I make it for my child to tell me the truth, like uncomfortable truth? Obviously, if it's something good, that's very easy. It's usually something we feel bad about. And so, like I work with families and like I tell my kid they can tell me anything, tell me everything, anything. But the kid says like, oh, I got like a bad grade, and then they start yelling and like going off. And I'm like, well, you can tell them they can tell you everything, but the way you respond is more important, the actions rather than the words. So, you do want to be aware of that. So it's not to say if someone lies, it's your fault if they lied to you, but to be aware of if that dynamic is there, how easy do we make it for people to tell us the truth or a specific person? So I think those are some of the main reasons I would say teens are hiding from their parents. They want to do something they know their parents don't like, so they think they have to hide it, or they did something bad and they might get punished or get in trouble in some way, so they hide that. And it doesn't mean the parents have to let everything go and say everything is okay, but it's trying to find that balance where especially for me, it's what I see happen is kids might go through something where they need support, like, they start, let's say, trying drugs or in a social situation, something happens and they find themselves in a bad place, but they're afraid to talk to their parents because they think the parents are going to get so mad or blame them or punish them so much that they might not reach out to them to get the support they need. And that's something where I encourage parents to be aware of that. Like, do you want your kid to be able to come to you when they really need you? And if you're really being judgmental and harsh with them in a lot of ways, they might feel like they can't, and they might just hide it or seek help elsewhere, or the problem will just keep growing. So I think, yes, children and teens, obviously, it's on them to be more honest, but parents have to really be aware of how much they impact their child's ability to be comfortable with them to share things that might not be comfortable.
Mm, yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for that great answer. And that's actually all the questions. Time flew by so fast. I
Oh,
think it
wow. Okay.
was, yeah, yeah. Thank you for all of your great answers. And is there actually anything you yourself would like to talk about? Anything you would like to,
I don't know. I mean, there's always so much. I that's why I do my radio show, so I get to share like a lot of things that are on my mind and
Mm,
thinking about and talking about. I do want to say I'm really impressed with you and what you're doing. And, that I think you started this podcast at 12 years old. And I think that's wonderful. It relates to what I was, we
Thank
talked
you.
about earlier today about children and, teens, giving them the space to explore things and try things. And, I'm sure a lot of this was your initiative to start something, but probably you needed some support and encouragement, or to feel like it's even possible to start something. And I think that's really, really important. I think parents often think my child should like this, or a good person, the analogy I use is like when you have a child, at some level, you're given a seed and you don't know what type of plant this is going to grow into, what kind of flower or tree or bush, whatever it's going to be, you don't really know. And your job is to give them the best environment and nurturing so they develop into whatever is their full potential. But oftentimes parents think, oh, I want to make them a flower, so I'm going to stretch this part, or, no, you should be taller, or you should be shorter. We try to control what our kids get into and how they become or who they become, rather than just giving them the good values and the good support for them to find their path. So when I see you doing what you're doing, I think that's amazing, because you're helping other people through what you're doing. I'm sure you're getting a lot through this process and growing through it as well. But you've been given the opportunity from a young age to explore things you're interested in. And I think that's really important, that children and teens get those opportunities and pursue those opportunities. It's not clear where it's going to end up, any of the things that we start doing, but just that process of exploring, learning, and learning about ourselves is so critical. So again, a big thank you to you for inviting me on your show, but also I'm really impressed by you, and I hope you continue doing this great work.
Thank you, I will. The pleasure was all mine. Something else I would like to request. I've noticed that on your social media and like your Instagram and also some of your podcasts, you like to recommend books to some of the listeners. Maybe would you like to recommend a book for children or parents to read?
Oh, wow. That's yeah. So on my show, I'll try to think as I'm also talking, giving this part of the answer. But yeah, my show it started like 6 years ago as kind of like a goal for myself to read a book every week. And I was doing the show back then. So then it kind of became, oh, I can then talk about the book every week. And then this is like, I think the 6th year I've been doing that. And people often ask me like, oh, you must read so fast, and I really don't. Like I read pretty like average pace. It takes a lot of time every week. And especially I obviously have to read it well enough or understand it in a way that I can talk about it. So I really do pay attention, but it's been a great thing. And I've learned so much. Gosh, books I would recommend. I don't know, this is not to plug myself, but you can go check out my Instagram, my podcast, and then you can hear like little parts about like each book. Each week I do like a 15-minute or so summary of the book or my thoughts on the book. But I really, I try to find books that I think I'll enjoy. So I like a lot of them. So I don't know if there's one I would say in particular. I'm almost like tempted to look through my Instagram to remember which ones, but nothing comes to mind off the top of my head that I would say. And then each year I do like a top 10 list of my favorite books from that last year. But I just encourage the reading and learning. It doesn't have to just be reading. I know I prefer the actual tangible book in my hand. I know there's Kindles and all these readers they have, and then audiobooks. So find a way, but I think it's just that continuous path of learning that you always have so much more to learn. And really that happens. I read a book and like they talk about 4 other books, I'm like, oh, I should read those. And so as many books as I read, I realize like how many more I wish to read and I would want to read. So I think that thirst for learning and knowledge and understanding, I would highly encourage. And so, yeah, you can check out my page to see if any of those books interest you, but maybe they don't. Read whatever, you find interesting, but keep learning.
Okay, then I have another question. Like,
Sure.
what would be your favorite book out of all the books that you read? What would be your favorite?
One of my favorite books for a long time, and I would always say this, I don't know if it's changed to be, is The Art of Loving by Eric Fromm. I really like Eric Fromm's thinking and the way he talks about things. And in that book, it's a pretty short one, but very deep. It's like 100 or so pages, but I've read it, I think 3 or 4 times. But I think it's a really good book in understanding parts of human experience, and then human love and what it means to love. Often in romantic love in Western societies, it's this idea that you have to just find the right person and then it's happily ever after. But he talks about the art of loving in the sense that we have to focus on developing the capacity in ourselves to love. It's not just finding the right person. It's like, what about you? You know, it's interesting. It's kind of this Western mindset of just like finding the right object and then everything is good. But he encourages you in that book to look at yourself and developing your own capacity to love. So I love the book and the concept, but also just the way he writes and thinks about things. So that's probably still my favorite book of all time.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So please tell our viewers where they can find more about you.
Sure. I mean, you could find me on Instagram and Twitter, and I have, you know, Facebook less, but I mean, I kind of still post everything on those three. Just my name, Farid Holakouee. And then I do the radio show, which I then make, you know, it's a podcast each week. So that's on Radio Hamra, but you can find the podcast on SoundCloud and then Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well, if they want to check any of those out, and be happy to hear. I'm always looking for book recommendations and things to talk about. So please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you. That's great. It was, yeah, that's it. It was amazing talking with you. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Arsam. It was a pleasure talking to you again. Thank you for inviting me on your show, and look forward to seeing the great things you'll continue to do.
Likewise. Thank you so much.